This is a collection of human stories. They are raw and real and true. The stories we hide can be confronting, but they are also meaningful, insightful, and inspirational. We bring the hidden stories out where they belong, in the open.
And this is my story. I never thought it would happen to me, the addict thing. You know, it took me a really long time to realise that I didn't have a choice. You know, by the end, you know, I'd progressed onto methamphetamine and GHB on a daily basis. I weighed 45 kilos, was covered in scabs. My story isn't one of jails, it isn't one of disease, it isn't one of homelessness. You know, like I maintained a job and, you know, like I paid my rent and I still had all my teeth. And according to me, my whole life, I used for 18 years and I couldn't be a drug addict. You know, how could I be a drug addict? You know, I finished a uni degree and really I couldn't get through an hour by the end without using another substance. I didn't think that my story would end up, you know, living with a criminal. I didn't think that I would be in abusive relationships. I just never thought it would happen to me. Some of my youngest memories was when I was, you know, 10 years old and I was, you know, hanging out with some friends and, you know, they were smoking cigarettes and, you know, they offered me one and, you know, I didn't really want to smoke it, but, you know, like I did, you know, I smoked it and I hated it. It tasted terrible, it made me cough. But there was this belief that if I smoked this cigarette, you know, that I would be accepted and loved by this group of friends. And that's definitely the basis by which most of the decisions that I made in my life, that was what it was all based on. I never really showed anyone that I struggled with this social stuff. You know, I would sit with my friends and we'd do what girls did when they're 12 years old and we'd sit and we'd laugh and we'd talk about boys or whatever you do. And I was always really able to, on the surface, make it seem like I was just like them. You know, I'd laugh and I'd talk and I was able to be the centre of attention. But for me, like, a lot of my war that goes on is this internal battle, you know, this inner critic that really criticises everything that I do. And when I smoked marijuana for the first time at the age of 12, the experience was this overwhelming relief. Like, I battled mental health without even realising. And when I had my first toke, it was like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders and I ran with it. I became a pot smoker and it was my identity and it was still fun, you know, like a lot of my drug use was fun for an extended period of time. You know, I mastered the art of lying from a very, very young age, you know, the covering up, being a pot smoker. And it made me feel okay in the world, you know, like I was always really lost unless I had this drug using mentality and the lifestyle and the friends, because I had something in common with them, you know. I could understand them and they understood me and this need just to sort of smoke weed and be stoned. I tried a few other drugs, you know, up until the age of 18. Pretty sure I took ecstasy and snorted a few lines of speed at my year 10 formal, you know. Drugs weren't in our household, you know. I didn't grow up in a household full of addiction and I would come home and I would pretend to be the perfect daughter, you know. It's always what I needed to do. And I don't know why it is that I found these drugs to be so relieving, but I did. And I was really exhausted playing this double life. I don't know, at the age of 18, I made this decision, having grown up in Sydney, to move to Melbourne. And I think the biggest reason why was simply because I was really exhausted living this double life, you know. If I moved away from my family, it meant that I could just be whoever I wanted to be. I was hoping maybe I would grow up and, you know, get responsibility. And it's funny, the first group of friends that I really got close to were people who lived in commission housing. They loved to smoke weed and do other drugs, and I guess I just had that connection with them, you know. It's always what I searched for, this connection with other people. And so, you know, my drug use continued. The only difference this time was I didn't have to pretend to anyone that I was okay, you know. I didn't have to pretend to be perfect. I sort of got to this point with my smoking marijuana where it sort of just gave me instant psychosis. Every time I'd smoke it, it's almost like I'd feel like it was raining on me. It just twisted my mind and it made me really paranoid. And, you know, my solution to this was to just do more speed and less marijuana. The drugs that I took seemed to get harder, so to speak, and I needed it a little bit more often than previously. You know, my next group of friends loved to use speed, you know, to smoke speed. I'd never used a glass pipe by this point in my life, so you know, someone showed me how to do it and I liked it. There's this issue with drugs, you know, like I love drugs. I'm not going to sit here and lie, you know, I love them, but you know, it's my experience that when I take them, my whole life eventually, well, I lose who I am. I started using speed every day, you know, and I would take prescription drugs like Xanax or Valium just to sort of take away any edge or force myself to go to sleep, you know. I really tried to play God. For me, when I used drugs, you know, I believed that they made me a better version of myself. And then all of a sudden, when I used a drug like speed, I felt like I was smarter. You know, I felt like I was more focused. I felt like I had more hours in the day to do all the things that I felt like I needed to do. I made a decision to go to university and study, and I decided to study to be a high school teacher, you know, high school maths and history teacher. I would go to my drug dealer's house for the second or third time in a day and get just the smallest amount and tell them, I just need this so I can finish my assignment and then I'm going to stop, you know. And I believed that. I really genuinely meant it. I just couldn't stop, you know. I'm not a drug addict. I'm a high school teacher, you know. I couldn't ever acknowledge that I had a problem with drugs. And the drugs worked for me to a certain degree with this stuff, you know. I would finish an essay in 4 hours and I would get a high distinction. At that point in my life, I really believed that the only reason why I got this high distinction is because of the drugs. You know, the drugs helped me be smarter. It sounds insane, but that's exactly what I believed at the time. I finished my degree. By this point in my life, you know, a full-time ice addict. You know, I would smoke ice when I was teaching a maths class because that made me smarter. And I would have something like GHB when I was doing a history class because that made me more animated, you know. I believed that the drugs made me, enhanced me. I realised in hindsight, like, I didn't do anything without a drug in my system. I didn't have a first kiss without a drug in my system. I didn't go on my first date without a drug in my system. You know, I never taught kids without a drug in my system. I told myself I'd never teach the kids without a drug in my system, you know, and that was impossible. You know, my life was putting in all of these lines that I would promise myself that I wouldn't cross. So the next line was that I wouldn't use drugs on school property. I would pop out to my car, have a little bit more and come back in. And it got to a point where it just wasn't enough, you know. I had to bring the drugs into the school with me. I had to go to the bathroom between classes and just use more. And my life was just really, really exhausting. You know, I'd wake up in the morning and roll over and turn my alarm clock off and get up and just sit on the edge of my bed. I needed at least 30 minutes so that I could consume enough drugs just so that I could stand up and then paint my face with a whole bunch of makeup and go and pretend to be a high school teacher, you know? And I was really confused and I was really lost and I was really broken and full of shame. You know, I could never ask for help. I couldn't let anyone know. And so I just kept doing it over and over again. By the end, I was in a relationship with someone who, you know, I thought it was love because he would ride on his motorbike for 45 minutes just so he could deliver me free drugs, you know. It must have been love because instead of punching me in the face, he would punch a hole in the wall next to me, you know. So he must love me if he doesn't hurt me. You know, living with someone who was a criminal, you know, there were weapons in the house. He did criminal activity every day, and I would use the drugs so that I could design a lesson plan so I could go and teach kids. You know, no one knew. I still tried really, really hard to show up to my life. I had normal friends who weren't addicts. I went to their weddings. I went to the engagement parties. I voted. You know, I did all the things that you do, and I just plastered a smile on my face and just pretended like I was the same as them, and I could never ever let them know that I had this problem. One friend here in Melbourne who was one of my closest friends, she suspected, you know, that the dramatic weight loss, you know, was a really big sign that maybe I had a problem. You know, this girl showed up at my house one day. She just staged this little intervention. She searched my room, looked everywhere for drugs, you know, even between socks, you know, she just searched everywhere. And I still tried to lie, you know, I still tried to cover up. I would be like, how dare you even insinuate that I would be on drugs? You know, like, shame on you, you know. I would make my friend feel bad. And it was all because I just didn't want my secret to sort of be exposed. And so the day when she staged an intervention, I still tried to lie. And I realised that I couldn't lie anymore. It was the best and worst day of my life. Like, I was really, really scared because this meant that maybe I would have to stop using drugs. I hadn't had a day without using drugs for nearly 18 years. Like, I didn't know how to do life without drugs, so I didn't think I'd survive it, you know? I didn't know how. It was really scary. But it was actually really relieving at the same time, because I finally didn't have to battle alone anymore. I was so exhausted. And so I tried to stay clean at this point in my life. You know, I just tried to continue on with life. I tried to do that and not use drugs. And I'll be honest, my experience was that doing that was even more painful than using drugs. You know, my friend, she loves me. She loves me so much, but she will never understand what it's like to try and go to the supermarket for the first time in your life without a drug in your system. It's really hard. Everything was really, really hard. And what I did was just try and smile and pretend like I was fine. So I was still just as lonely and just as broken. I hadn't done anything to try and change and work on myself. So when I bumped into a friend who I'd used drugs with and they offered me drugs, at that point saying no just wasn't an option. And so I used. I learned a really, really valuable lesson. It doesn't matter what drug I put in my system. As soon as I put it in my system, I have this overwhelming obsession and compulsion that kicks in, this just need to have more. It just consumes my entire body when I put a drug in my system. I started using GHB addictively, more than I ever had in my entire life. I eventually just started using ice again, and very quickly I lost weight again. And at this point, my friend came back and she just said, "I think you're using drugs again. I want you to do a drug test." And so I just told her that I had been, and this time we tried something different. I couldn't stop working, and I couldn't go into a residential rehab. It was really just, I couldn't do it. And I did this outpatients program at a rehab. In the evenings I'd go and talk to someone there. And the counsellor there was also a recovering drug addict. And he was the first person that I ever encountered in my entire life who couldn't stop using drugs, but found a way. And I wanted what he had. He introduced me to a support network of hundreds of recovering drug addicts. And I found so many people who were just like me. I was instilled with so much hope and feeling like I can voice those things that I have spent my entire life trying to pretend like they didn't go on. So I got into recovery at the age of 30. And it was a really challenging process for me. And I struggled to do all of those things that people by the age of 30 have already experienced. And it's really hard for their ego and pride, I voted in early days and I had a panic attack because there were too many people in a small room and I couldn't deal with all of the anxiety. And that's why for me, having all of those people who are in my support network, having them around me, having them remind me that I'm worthy of it, and having them promise me that it gets better has been so crucial. I think it was about 6 months into my recovery, when I laughed for the first time. I lost the ability to laugh for years. It was so sad. When it comes to my family, they just had no idea. So today, I try and be honest, and I think I was a few months clean, and my mother was coming to visit me, and with the support of people who are in my, my recovery community, I made a decision to sort of tell my mother that I was in recovery from addiction. When I told her that I was in recovery from addiction, I believe she had this mixed experience of overwhelming sadness and experienced a sense of blame within herself, like, what did I do wrong as a mother that my daughter became a drug addict? And but I also think that she had a sense of relief, because a lot of her questions were answered as to why I behaved the way that I behaved. Today, my mum and dad, my brother, they're my #1 supporters. They remind me every day that I'm worthy, and didn't realise that they had this unconditional love for me and would always support me. And it was a really beautiful experience, which has now evolved into the most meaningful and authentic relationship with my mum and dad and my brother. I made a decision to share my story. I know I've got my face hidden. For me, there's consequences to being a drug addict, and my biggest fear is that I wouldn't ever be able to teach again, and that's why I'm doing that. But I felt it was so important to still take this opportunity to share my story so that another person on this earth who's listening can just feel that little bit less alone. Chances are someone will eventually come across drugs, and I would suggest that before you take that drug, you stop and ask yourself, why? Why do I want to take this drug? Do I want to take it to impress this person? Do I want to take it because I'm really uncomfortable and I feel like I can't talk to people? I feel like I'm not funny, and if I just take it, it'll make me all of the things that I think I'm not. Because if you are, if that's your motive behind taking the drug, it's potentially just dangerous territory. If I would say anything, I would just say, just talk about it. Just let someone know. Because once it's in the open, life's amazing. It took some work. It took a really dark period, to be honest, you know? That first laugh took me 6 months. But once you get there, it's worth it. So just ask for help. And there's so much light at the other side.